All
right, now, if you look at the map, you will see that in the year 1000, the Moors, Islamics, had taken over the vast majority of what is now Spain and more than half of what is now Portugal. And the Christians were confined to the north. Then 85 years later, the Aragon extended itself on the eastern frontier so that the Islamics only took over about half of Spain. Then we get to 1150, and you see that Portugal, pretty much all of Portugal, was under Islamic. They had expanded to the northwest, but they were slightly diminished in the south and on the east. But then in 1250, the Moors were pretty much confined to a small section in southern Spain, and the Portugal itself was becoming independent. Now, telling you all this because this is preparation for 1491, when somebody wants to put this on the board. 1491, this is my board. Can you be my board, man?
No, I'm not good at that. Go ahead. I'm not
Well,
good at it at all.
you taught school for years.
Yeah, 38, I'm over. Then I'm still teaching. I just figured out today, 10 years I've been volunteering in elementary school. Today it was salamanders. Second grade.
1491. You talking about people?
No, I'm talking about little kids.
1492, most of the ships that were coming in and out of Spain were full of Jews and Islamics who were being dumped anywhere in the Mediterranean, the Atlantic seaboard, or Adriatic, or Ionian Sea, wherever they could be dropped off. They were being emptied from this territory in the south of Spain. So it was, what do you want to call it, ethnic cleansing? But they wanted to be rid of them. And it was because those ships were so occupied that Christopher Columbus couldn't find very many ships for his expedition to explore a world that, up to this point, nobody knew anything about. He thought he was going to go to the Indies, India. Instead, he ended up in Central America, as all of us know. This year, he discovered Columbus Day was on what, October
12.
I know that's when it really is, but
Oh, yeah.
but we celebrate it differently each year.
It's always on Monday or Friday
Yeah,
now.
no. Anyway, October 12, 1492, he discovered this hemisphere.
Bob, what caused the restriction of the Moors from your first, the 10,000 in 1085 and finally at 1250, they just have this very small part in southern Spain. What was the reason for their shrinking in the territory?
Because the north, the Catholics were
pushing
were
down.
pushing down, getting rid of them, and they had been on the ascendancy with some pretty powerful groups, and they had quite a high civilization. Mathematics, science, medicine, astronomy, philosophy. And it's because of the Islamic scholars that we have a lot of our arithmetic and a lot of our geometry and advances in medicine. Also, Thomas Aquinas got Aristotle from Averroes and Avicenna, who were out of southern Spain, Islamic and Jewish scholars. But that was the high point period of Islamic civilization. They never got better than that. It's been a downhill slip ever since. But they had a higher civilization than Spain. Okay? You need to know this in order to understand Western civilization. You also have to need to know this because if we're talking about ecumenism, if we're talking about interreligious dialogue, there wasn't anything like that then. They didn't discuss the similarities or the differences. There was no discussion. We're right, you're wrong, so get out of here. Convert or die if you don't get out. The Inquisition, the Holy Inquisition, and I use the word holy reservedly, but they considered this to be divine vengeance upon error. The philosophical construct out of which they were operating is error has no rights. Error has no rights. Error has no rights. Only truth has a right to exist, to be. But error has no rights. That's a pretty black and white, yes and no, right and wrong perspective. But that's, I'm not defending it, I'm just saying that is how they were functioning back then. Very absolutistic.
You said only truth has rights to exist, to be? Is that what?
Error has no rights, only truth has rights, okay. It's that same attitude that prevailed in the Reformation. That they can't be right. Martin Luther can't be right. He's wrong. Therefore, anything he's for, we're going to be against. Anything that Calvin is for, we're going to be against. Because we're right and they're wrong. Okay? No dialogue, no discussion. Now here, interrupting the flow, saw these papers that I handed out, and maybe there's just a page of something on each table. I teach the men and the wives who are studying to be deacons, church history. And I put them to work. They had to write papers. It's not a class like this. If I asked you to take papers, you will not be back the next time, I assure you that. I had to do any real work. For Christ's sakes, Peter wouldn't even get up to the board.
Well, bring the chair in.
I'm sorry. But we have these papers. They're 1 and 2 pages long. Some are a bit longer on topics. I'm making them available to you, but you got to pay for them. And what I would like you to do, if you're interested, is give me your name on this sheet, your address, your phone number, and your email, and circle the number in front of the paper that you want, or papers. If you want the whole set, it's $50. Individual papers are 25 cents each. And if you buy the whole set, I will throw in some stuff that's not on here. So, if you would fill these out as we progress through the evening, huh? Now, where do you think we left off last time?
Well,
Page of discussion.
Where did we leave off last time?
what we had talked about, we were talking on the way here.
Yeah.
And I thought you had talked about Luther, and yet when I looked at this chronology, I don't remember you talking about the Council of Florence or Joan. Maybe you did mention Joan of Arc. Yeah.
What are you looking at?
I'm looking at this.
That's a supplemental.
I like that.
That's a supplemental.
Yeah, I guess you went to the Council of Trent.
Yeah,
Oh, yeah, you did.
I did. Okay. We also talked about advances in science, medicine, the Age of Enlightenment, the Age of Reason, Marco Polo's discoveries, right?
Yeah, and you talked about the missionaries.
About the what?
Missionaries,
The
like,
missionaries,
Yeah,
yes.
all that.
Trust. We talked about Henry VIII dissolving all 800 monasteries and convents in England, and the complete disruption of the social services system that monasticism provided to that nation. Okay, so we also talked about slavery and that followed the colonization, missionary activity, the church. We also talked about cultural insensitivity on the part of the Franciscans and Dominicans, as well as the cultural adaptation of the Jesuits, the Society of Jesus. And eventually, I believe that Japan and China and India could have been converted to Catholicism and Christianity if the Chinese rites and the Indian rites and the Japanese rites were allowed to be maintained. But the Dominicans and the Franciscans were very Eurocentric, and they put the kibosh on it. They panicked at what the Jesuits were doing, and so as a result, Rome said, no, you can't do that, and don't even think about it. We'll forbid you to even think about it. Thought control, you see. Not only don't keep your mouth shut, but don't even think about it. So as a result, what was truly Catholic, namely, the Catholic Church is the universal church. And that doesn't mean uniform. Catholic means a great umbrella under which all races, nations, attitudes, perspectives, cultures, languages can not only exist but thrive. Every language group, every culture can make a contribution to this whole. But when any one particular ethnicity or race or continent dominates the thing, we lose Catholicity. Give you a good example of how that's not working. Recently, within the last 2 years, a new version of the Mass was foisted on us with English that obviously came from someone for whom English was a second language. Run-on sentences, obscure words, and sentences that weren't sentences, just phrases with no subject or no predicate or just a phrase. at the end of the period, and then this phrase, Christ our Lord, okay, so what? And then words like consubstantial, I know it's correct, but the older, other translation was one in being with the Father. Well, that means more to us than the word consubstantial. Okay, now this universal, this application of English usage was foisted on the whole English-speaking world. Well, you know as well as I do that the English of Britain speak differently than we do, and the Australians and the New Zealanders, they speak English differently than we do, and the people of Rhodesia and South Africa speak a bit differently than we do. They have different phrases and expressions. None of that was taken into consideration. However, it was for the Spanish speakers. There are several versions of the Missal for various groups who speak Spanish. Now, the Spanish of Cuba, the usage of Cuba, is very different from the Spanish of Mexico. The Spanish of Mexico is different from the Spanish of Argentina. The Spanish of Spain is very different from the Spanish of Mexico. In Mexico, it's Valencia. In Spain, it's Valencia and Barcelona. Why? I don't know. That's how they do it. So they claim they're right. Mexico's, we're right. So Rome did make the adaptation. But why is Rome even imposing its stuff on the rest of the world? We have groups in the United States. There are groups in England. There was ICDL, English Consolation for English in the Liturgy. And they had a version that was very good, but they were dissed, they were tossed. And this crowd that's trying to go backwards as fast as they possibly can foisted this latest translation on us. And I know I got the the rector of the cathedral and his sidekick, Father Raoul, very angry at me because I objected to it. I said, it's awful. It's awful. I don't like it. Well, I wasn't supposed to be thinking those thoughts. Well, I am, and I do, and I'm not ashamed. They walked out of the meeting because I was objecting so vigorously. And I was also objecting to the restoration of Latin in the liturgy. It has no pastoral relevance. What difference? The music is beautiful. Yeah, we're losing that heritage, unfortunately, but to celebrate Mass in Latin, what does that mean to somebody in Afghanistan or North India or South India or Hong Kong? Nothing. It's not in any way, shape, or form a part of their culture. And just because we are the Latin Rite doesn't mean that we have to impose every single Eurocentric thing on the rest of the world. Now, I get these concepts from having studied in a missionary seminary. And my professors, God bless them, wonderful, wonderful professors, many of them Italian, and what's beautiful, they studied at the Roman seminary. One of their classmates was Angelo Roncalli. Personal friends of Angelo Roncalli, who's Pope John the 23rd. And he is my hero. And many of my professors, when they got too old to teach, went to Soto del Monte, which is the Roncalli home, lived in the Pope's former family home, and have created an anthology of all of his writings from the time he was a child until he died. So I am of the spirit of John the 23rd when it comes to this sort of thing. And he was shaped and formed by the same people who educated me. The stuff that's come afterwards, especially under Pope John Paul II and Pope Benedict, is a real departure from what Pope John the 23rd envisioned. And I'm not afraid to say that. I know that Pope John the 23rd did tremendous work in crushing and destroying communism, and I'm very, very happy about that. And he also did a marvelous job in governing the church. And Ratzinger, Cardinal Ratzinger, Pope Benedict, is a marvelous theologian. But then I sincerely believe that in the latter years of his pontificate, he was managed. by some ultra-conservatives in the Curia. This is my opinion. And there are those who are close to the situation who agree with me and who have also furnished me with this piece of information. We also have, in every age, unfortunately, nationalism. Spain has sought to dominate the church in South America and in the southern part of North America. We had earlier on discussion about Joseph, Emperor Joseph II. The Austro-Hungarian Empire, they called him the sacristy emperor because he was always messing with church practice and discipline. It was the emperor who was saying how many candles we would have on the altar, how many altar cloths we would have on the altar, what orders could function in the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and what orders were going to be tossed out, and nationalizing church institutions, and having special ministries and offices that were in charge of church life. Well, yeah, that's not freedom at all. And it's also making the church not universal, but very particular to the Austro-Hungarian emperor and his thought. And then we're in France. Earlier on, we had the Avignon papacy and the French dominating the life of the church for 300 years, with French popes and French king pulling all the strings, that kind of stuff. So all of this goes against the universality of the church. The church has had to fight, and fight hard, to be a universal church. In this country, we had a marvelous Archbishop, John Ireland of Minneapolis, St. Paul. And he looked at all these immigrants coming into the United States, and he also looked at all the bias and prejudice that a lot of American people, Protestant people, had toward these Catholics. And he wanted to have Catholics stand out as being people, citizens, faithful Americans, just like everybody else. And so he went for a great deal of uniformity and a whole lot of cultural stuff that was a part of the life, religious life, of these Catholics from all over the world were trying to live out. He suppressed them. He used his tremendous influence to suppress these usages. The Eastern Catholics had a married clergy. He saw to it that no married priest could function in the United States. As a result of that, we have the OCA, Orthodox Church of America, where these formerly Catholic clergy and bishop went back to Orthodoxy so that they could practice their form of Catholicism. The church over on back of Friedman's, down that
Mountain View.
Mountain View. St. Sergius, or it's had a couple of names. Anyhow, Father Michael Margich was the pastor there, and now after that will be his son, Father Lawrence Markovich. And but their heritage, their ancestry is Catholic, Eastern Catholic. But I know that John Ireland was meaning, he meant well. But I don't think that will be any excuse for the suppression of the various expressions of Catholicism. There are 25 different ways of being Catholic. 25 different liturgies. 25 different sets of disciplines. And it's all okay. The Latin Rite of the Roman Catholic Church is not the only show in town. But we forget that.
It is the biggest, isn't it, Father?
It's the biggest, but that doesn't mean that it's the best. None of them is the best. They're all okay. They're all okay. But when you're the biggest, you sometimes exert too much power and control. And that seems to be a bad habit right now of the Roman Curia, to be exercising too much power and control. And wonderfully, Pope Francis is nipping it away. He's appointing new people who are respectful of the various national groups of bishops. Under Benedict and under John Paul II, national conferences of bishops had their authority and their power minimized to one where everything had to go to Rome and then come back before it was authorized to be published or promoted or approved. Not anymore. Those days are over, thank God. Over the centuries, we have seen the expansion of the papal office. And when we're talking about the reunion of the East and the West, namely Orthodoxy and Catholicism, they say there are insurmountable difficulties. I've heard this many, many times from as people high up as Patriarch of Moscow, and I was his guest for about a month, Danielovsky, Patriarch Alexei, and from people like Callista Swear, the bishop in Oxford, England, Orthodox, Greek Orthodox, and from the late Archbishop Anthony of San Francisco. So finally, I got a document a few months ago, and they spelled out what these insurmountable difficulties are. And it boils down to an overextension of papal prerogatives. What the Roman Curia is just too extensive, has too much power. Close the door.
She just went up.
She told me to be quiet. I wonder who they are. We need a policeman here. Oh. Who is it? Oh, people from upstairs? Oh yeah, bunch of shrinks? Huh. The doctrine of papal infallibility was declared in 1870 in Rome, following the unification of the various Italian states, was a real irritant to Orthodoxy as well as to a lot of Protestants. And you've heard the axiom from Lord Acton, power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. Well, that from Lord Acton was not in reference to the Queen of England or King of England or the Emperor or anybody else. It was clear reference to the papacy. And he was a Catholic thinker, Lord Acton. And the doctrine of papal infallibility was, I suppose you might call it a consolation prize to a pope who had lost all civil power. He was, in effect, the king of Central Italy and had been so for centuries. And he just couldn't get over this. When Italy was unified under King Victor Emmanuel, in Garibaldi's help and all those characters before, he just couldn't deal with it. Couldn't see how the church, how the papacy could function without the safeguard of a buffer as a state, a government. But the doctrine of papal infallibility really has only been used twice, and it has to do with what we already believed anyway, namely that the Blessed Virgin Mary was conceived free of original sin, which comes to us from Augustine of Hippo, and that at the end of her life, the Virgin Mary was assumed into heaven. Whether she did it while she was still alive or after she died, that wasn't defined. The Orthodox call it Holy Dormition, same thing. It is the councils of the church which have provided infallibility or fallible teachings, and The first 7 councils of the church were ecumenical because they involved both the east and the west. The other councils that we call ecumenical pretty much only involve the west. And the east has not had a council since about 800 or so, 700s. So they question our so-called ecumenical councils, 9 through 20, as truly being ecumenical. I think that's what Sister Olive was telling some of you in the RCIA. They question, they prefer to call them synods of the West, or synods of the Latin Church. I don't know what's eventually going to happen. But all of them were what we would have to call pastoral councils, and they had to do with the discipline of the church. The Second Vatican Council was pastoral, truly pastoral. What we have here, if you want to put 3 letters down in a row, A, P, E. Now what's that spell? A, yeah, but that's not what I'm going to talk about. The Second Vatican Council, attitude. Perspective. And emphasis. EMPH. Emphasis. That's rather undefinable. It's not at all legalistic, but it is a reality. And that is what I would call the legacy of Pope John XXIII. Another attitude, another perspective, and another emphasis. And I believe that Pope Francis has restored this. He's got the council back on track.
Another question. Who can call an ecumenical council now? I mean, I know Rome does and calls them that, but I mean, the East could never call one, right? Because I mean,
Well,
they're
the first 8 were called in the East, and either the Patriarch of Constantinople and or the Emperor, but then the Pope collaborated, so, yeah.
Well, I mean, we agree on those, but after that, I mean, the East couldn't, they were divided up.
They were already separated.
themselves.
They were already separated. They haven't had one. They themselves have not had one.
But they wouldn't be able to, probably, would
Yeah, they could.
they? I mean, who would they? Who's
Patriarch of Constantinople. He's the top Orthodox prelate.
You think they would come? I mean, everyone else would?
Well, they have a movement called Pan-Orthodoxy, P-A-N Orthodoxy. And they are, they've scheduled a meeting in the very near future where all of the leaders of Orthodoxy throughout the world are going to be getting together. But we're also getting together with the Pope and the Patriarch of Constantinople meet each other at least twice a year. When Pope Francis was made the Pope and he was installed as Pope, Patriarch Bartholomew just showed up and he participated in the liturgy. He preached. Now, this wasn't happening before, that kind of closeness. Archbishop Kirill became the Patriarch of Moscow after, which is the largest Orthodox body in the world. They have 300 million adherents. So they'd be about 30% the size of Roman Catholics. But he is Western educated, Kirill. And I've talked to him, I met him, he's a grand man. And the Patriarch Alexei was holding my hands while we were chatting, and Carol was translating for us. And some messenger came over to this was in Oakland, some messenger came over to Patriarch Alexei and told him about the burning of the Parliament House in Moscow, and the conversation was ended right there. He left the group and he got back on a flight in order to exercise leadership as the Russia was very, very shaky at that point. And that's when Yeltsin emerged and all that kind of thing. So we talked about a lot of things, Patriarch of Moscow. And when I was his guest at the Danilovsky, likewise we had opportunity to share. But there's a great fear especially with the Russian Orthodox. They don't want to be subsumed. They don't want to be taken over. They've got their discipline, which has lasted for 1,000 years. They have maintained a deposit of faith. So the Holy Spirit is in the church. The Holy Spirit was promised, and the Holy Spirit is fully functioning in Orthodoxy. And the documents coming from the Roman Catholic Church say that of all the bodies, religious bodies, the Orthodox most clearly, the fullness of truth subsists in the Roman Church, and the church which most closely approximates it is Orthodoxy. There's very, very little difference. And the differences are disciplinary. So what's the discipline? Celibacy of the clergy. That's a discipline of the church. Fasting rules. I mean, their fasting is rigorous. That's a discipline of the church. Ours is pretty easy. Awfully easy now. Lent is a breeze compared to what the Orthodox go through. The dating of Easter, that's a discipline of the church. It doesn't matter, it's unimportant. Everybody's right. There's no right and wrong, and it's everybody, it's all okay. They have different discipline. Unless you're one of these rigid kind of people that, well, it's got to be my way or the highway. No way. Stop that. All right. One of the great tragedies of the church was the dissolution of the Society of Jesus. For nearly 40 years they were out of business. By political pressure of Spain and Portugal and France, they were dissolved. They maintained themselves in Russia because the decree of dissolution was to be published by the civil rulers, and the emperor, empress of Russia were not about to do that. The Tsar and Tsarina, they weren't going to do that. And they were also functioning in England. And the Protestant king or queen of England wasn't going to be doing that either, suppressing them. And then they were in the United States, and their separation of church and state, they weren't going to suppress them either. So they continued to exist in Russia, and in Eastern Europe, and in North America, and in Great Britain and Ireland.
Well, what were those years, Father, that 40-year period? More or less?
You have to look it up.
Okay. And what was the reason for the dissolution?
They were too liberal, and they're too powerful, too influential.
They were still liberal.
Huh?
They're still very liberal.
Thank God
Yeah.
for that. But they got put back together again and continued to thrive. It's the largest order in the church. They were very much opposed to Jansenism. They were the chief opponents of Jansenism, which was a religious movement in Catholicism, a heresy, but it never separated itself from heresy. It insidiously impregnated a whole lot of Catholic thought and attitude for centuries. And that's out of the 1600s also. Very rigid, very moralistic. There's hardly anything you can do that isn't a sin. And you don't go to communion unless you're going to confession every single time, and even then, you're not worthy. Nobody's worthy of anything. Very, very heavy guilt tripping. And mercy and compassion of God certainly isn't part of Jansenism. And those of you who are 70 years and older can remember some of those attitudes that came out of Jansenism. Very, very righteous, very rigid, very strict, as if there's virtue in misery.
When did they get rid of them completely? When did they get rid of all them completely?
Well, I don't know if they're really all gone. Some of the right-wing Catholics are resurrecting it, okay? Some of the strict Catholics are resurrecting these things, these attitudes.
Oh,
Yeah.
they are?
Oh, yes, oh, yes, oh, yes, oh, yes, oh, yes.
Well,
But I'm not with them, no way, no way.
no.
All right. In 1776, Bishop John Carroll, who was a Jesuit, was made the United States. His relatives were the few Catholic signers of the Declaration of Independence, Carroll. And John Carroll was made the priest in charge of the American Church. Eventually, they made him the bishop, the first bishop of Baltimore, and then later on the Archbishop of Baltimore. But that is what we would call the primatial city, or primatial see. The primate of our country is the Archbishop of Baltimore, because that was the first diocese in the United States. When I was in Rome 20 years ago, I was going up and down the elevator for 3 months with Archbishop Keeler, the Archbishop of Baltimore. And this was during the Synod of Bishops. And so one day I said to him, you know, it's a privilege for me to be going up and down the elevator several times a day with the primate of my country. And he said, over here they seem to know that I'm a primate. And I said, how do they know that? The place is crawling with bishops and archbishops. He said, well, I'm being fitted for my cardinal robes. And when I go to the tailor, they put these robes on me and the sleeves are long enough for a gorilla. Before they short them. He had a good sense of humor, he's wonderful. But the beginnings of church government in the United States was in Baltimore. And Bishop John Carroll, way back in the 1700s, was an advocate of the vernacular in the liturgy.
Yeah.
And preaching in the language of the people. And optional celibacy. But he didn't make it, that part. Then from Baltimore, other dioceses were created. Bardstown, Kentucky, which later on became one over to Louisville, Cincinnati, Boston, New York, Charleston. And then the church grew and grew and grew because of immigration. From about 1840 on, there were waves of immigrants coming to the United States. The first were the Irish, and earlier on it was the French who came in from Canada or who were here already. And then after the Irish were Germans and so on. And every group that came, there were Armenians and Greeks and Germans and Croatians and Serbs and all these
Italians. Italians.
Italians, yeah. Now it's Mexicans and Central Americans and Asians from Vietnam and Laos and Cambodia and all these places. Okay, but in accompanying every single movement of migrants to this United States, there has been this and that, bias, prejudice, in the 1840s, 1850s, there was a political party known as the Know-Nothings. They were opposed to these immigrants. People, Irish people, they would see a sign, help wanted, Irish need not apply. Dogs and Italians, please stay off the lawn. Stuff like that. You know, real hearty welcome awaits you here in the United States. We love everybody. And no way. No way. And it's still bad. My heart just goes out to the Latino people. Our Congress just will not budge on immigration reform. It's one of the downsides. We also had a tremendous amount of resistance by the Native Americans to all these people coming here. And after all, it was their country, their land. So no wonder Iroquois and Mohawks and Apaches got upset and did in quite a few colonists and pioneers and all these people. We were in their territory, you know. And yet, in the United States, we have this concept, manifest destiny. As if the manifest destiny is a thinking, God wills that we go from East Coast to the West Coast. It's God wants this. I don't know that he ever said that anywhere in the scriptures, unless you consider the United States to be the new promised land. But that's a stretch. That's a stretch, my goodness, it's ridiculous. But that was the attitude. You know, we have a right to this land because God says so. God told us this. I don't know when he ever did that. I don't think he ever did it either. Okay? But so we've done dirt on the natives in this country. We suppressed their language, we suppressed their culture, we killed them, rounded them up, killed them. As long ago as just maybe 30 years ago, we were sterilizing the women after they had one baby. Or vasectomizing the men so that there wouldn't be any more of them. Tell me that's not genocide. But we had people that worked very hard to bring not only justice, but human dignity, respect to the Native Americans. And among them was Catherine Drexel, St. Catherine Drexel. And we also wonder about Udapero Serra. They say that he slapped around Mexicans and Indians. Maybe he did. But in those days, anybody in a position of superior slapped around people. Bishops would slap around their priests. You know, physically sit and slap. You know, Mother Superiors were always punishing their nuns and sisters, the other sisters. People in government slap people around.
Oh, they did?
Yeah, policemen would bully. You know, what do you think they had these clubs for? It was to hit people. Teachers would beat the children, pupils, every day, whether they needed it or not, just to keep them in line. How's the expression go?
Something to tune of the hickory stick.
Yeah, no, but there's another one.
Spare the rod.
Yeah, spare the rod and spoil the child. Yeah, well that was, they didn't spare the rod at all because they weren't going to spoil the kids.
Well, is that where the flap at confirmation came from? I mean,
No, that was actually a love tap. Initially, it was a sign of affection, like a stroke in the cheek, yeah. And eventually, some overpowering bishops got the idea.
no, man, they're getting whacked.
Yeah.
When I got confirmed.
Because there was a time when we don't share feelings, you know. part of this Jansenism thing was denial of feelings. Don't ever say, I feel this or that, and the other thing. You're supposed to think and will, but not feel. I feel this or that. No, don't feel anything. The Jesuits, St. Ignatius of Loyola in the spiritual exercises, emotions, feelings are very much a part of our spiritual life. And we have to be in touch with our feelings. And this is one wonderful good thing about Ignatian or Jesuit spirituality is being in touch with your feelings. Before you go anywhere with acts of the will or acts of the intellect, you got to deal with your feelings. You got to deal with your feelings. So if somebody dies, you're in grief. And if you go to somebody, oh, don't feel bad. What do you mean don't feel bad? I'm a human being. I feel bad because I love this person. Or this person hurt me and I want to hate them. Okay. You can work through it. But don't say, don't feel. It's a whole process of dealing with our feelings from the initial feeling we have until the final and ultimate resolution. Somebody insults you, you're going to smile, some little shit grin, and just eat it up. It's okay. It's not okay. Not in the least. We have to work through it. And if somebody consistently hurts us, we have a whole lot to work through. And if we choose not to have anything more to do with this person, that's just being sensible. Jesus said, if somebody slaps you on the cheek, then turn the other cheek. Try that. They can't get you. You turn your head. They can't get you with that hand, the slapper. So Jesus is basically saying you can avoid a second attack. Come on up and I'll demonstrate. Come on over. I want to hit you. Okay. Okay, now turn your head. I can't get that sheet that way.
That's a
Okay?
great
You got it?
presentation.
Thank you for being a victim. Elizabeth Seton was another American, and she brought into being, along with Bishop of Philadelphia, John Newman, parochial education, parochial schools. Because children were not being educated. We didn't have universal education, and Catholic children were quite often discriminated against in the public schools, and their Catholicism was being ridiculed. There were whole states in which Catholics were given a very hard time, where my grandparents and great-grandparents came from. Ku Klux Klan burned crosses in the yard. And incidentally, that's the same territory where the Michigan militia is operating, and it's the same territory that Timothy McVeigh frequently visited. Anybody remember Timothy McVeigh? Well, I met him at the airport, and he had been visiting his friends about a mile from our old family farm. The priest up there told me, don't go visit the family farm anymore. We don't own it, but we just go look at it from the outside. We don't own it anymore, we sold it a long time ago. But because the Michigan militia is using live ammunition in their maneuvers, well, that's the territory that Timothy McVeigh was running around in. But back then, it was very anti-Catholic. And my grandparents and the Potts family and the Fitzgeralds were the only three people in that county who were Roman Catholic. Everybody else was anti-Catholic. talk about burning crosses and stuff like that. Many years ago, when I was priest up in Humboldt County, I'd have to come down to Santa Rosa for meetings. And on the way back, there was a hitchhiker, colored fellow, and I stopped the car and rolled down the passenger window. And I said, where are you going? And he looked at me and said, I'm not going anywhere with you. And I said, well, why not? He said, what's that? And I had an L with a hood, and the white robe with the hood hanging on the hanger. He said, what's that? And I said, I'm a priest, and that's my robe. Oh, I thought you were a Klan member. So he got in, the ride was safe. I didn't burn any cross in his yard. But in this country, we faced a tremendous amount of anti-Catholic attitudes. It was only in the First World War, by the First World War, that we began to stand alone as an okay bunch of people. Because of our involvement in the war, troops fighting side by side, Protestants and Jews and Catholics all fighting together. And then they were exposed to some pretty decent people in France and that kind of thing. And then the public school system also was a great leveler. People got to know each other. And in the foreign missions, 100 years ago, the Protestants themselves came to realize that no one church can take care of all the social needs and minister effectively with hospitals and clinics and schools and for these people that are so disadvantaged. And so they banded together, Baptists and Methodists and Episcopalians and Presbyterians and Congregationalists, working together to provide these ministries and services to the natives of whatever country. And then they realized, they need a Bible. They need the Bible in their own language. And so they combined, the Protestants got together and provided translations, scripture scholarship, and then Catholics got in on the act. American missionaries, European missionaries of whatever kind, they're lonely when you're over there. And even though you're assimilating and respecting the culture, you still like to hang around some of your own kind once in a while, talk French, talk English, talk German, whatever it is you want to talk, and maybe have a good pasta dinner or French pepper steak or something. So they began to socialize. Catholic, Protestant missionaries, and the Protestant missionaries among themselves. So the beginnings of ecumenism happened in foreign countries, in the Third World, in Asia and Africa. Because of these interactions, these relationships developed, and because of the relationships that developed, friendships developed, and with friendships came trust, and with trust came openness, and with openness came dialogue. And that's the beginnings of ecumenism. Where is it today? We're back at the beginning. I think we just will dialogue ourselves out for now. Not too many more dialogues possible. But we are now involved again in social services, and as the Pope has put it, Pope Benedict and Pope Francis and Cardinal Casper and Cardinal Kroll, who were the head guys for ecumenism in our church, have said, back to providing human services, helping people have a better life. Together, ministering to people in charity, working for justice, working for peace. That's the state of ecumenical activity today. And then there was Mrs. Mrs. O'Donovan was walking down the street when she met up with Father Flaherty. And Father said, "Top of the morning to you, aren't you Mrs. Donovan?" "I am." "And didn't I marry you and your husband a few years ago?" She said, "Aye, you did that, Father." And how many wee ones have you now?" "Oh, Father, we've tried very hard and we just have no children at all." No children." "Oh," priest said, "Father, I'm going to be going to the Holy Land next week, and I'm going to light a candle for you. And I'm going to ask the nuns at the convent to light a candle every day, to keep that candle burning, so that you'll have some little ones." Well, I must have done that because 10 years later, they met up again. "Oh, I remember you now. Yeah, Mrs. Donovan, how are you?" "Oh, I'm pretty busy." "Oh, you have children?" "Oh, yes, we have children." After you lit that candle, I had triplets, then I had twins, then I had triplets again, and then I had a boy, and then I had a girl." "Oh, that's something." And the lady asked Mrs. Donovan, said, "And so, Father Flaherty, when are you going to the Holy Land again?" "Oh, I'm going in 2 weeks." She said, "Would you please blow out that candle?" And then lastly, can you all see this picture? The withered up old lady. See her? Okay. So a doctor was on his morning run and he noticed this old lady. She was sitting on her front steps and she was smoking a cigar. So he walked up to her and said, "I couldn't help but notice how happy you look. What is the secret?" "Oh, I smoke 10 cigars a day. Before I go to bed, I smoke a nice big joint. Apart from that, I drink a whole bottle of Jack Daniels every day. And I only eat junk food. I pop pills, have sex, and I never get any exercise." Well, it's absolutely amazing. "And how old are you, dear?" 40. Now that I've got that out of my system, we'll go back to the serious stuff. Time for the machinery.
It's on.
Yeah.
I thought you just wanted the first joke not to be taped, so I taped everything else. But
It's out in cyberspace forever and ever.
It's gonna go viral on YouTube now.
The Industrial Revolution of the 1800s profoundly changed the world. And it was based upon labor which was seen as a commodity. Workers were part of the machinery of industry. Factories replaced cottage industry. And there were people who were wealthy because they were industrialists. But a lot of them came from the Reformed Protestant tradition of John Calvin. John Calvin taught predestination. And that means that some people are predestined by God to be saved. Others are predetermined, predestined to be damned. And there's not a single thing you or I or they can do about it. And a sign that one is predestined to heaven is they do well in this life. They're intelligent, they're wealthy, they have power, they have influence. Things are going well for them. And another sign that someone is predestined to hell is they're poor, a lot of problems, health problems, sickness, living in misery, ignorant, uneducated, this and that. And therefore, because they are condemned or damned, they can be exploited. And they were. So the evils of the Industrial Revolution, the so-called robber barons of industry, they were working on out of a religious basis, unfortunately. Society was very much of a class distinctions. The robber barons were the new nobility in the world, and they justified their success with hard work. But they paid these people who worked for them pittances, meager pay. And sometimes they owned the company store. So these people were beholden to these industrialists for the food that they ate, for the clothing that they wore. The houses that they lived in were all part of the operation. For example, in Pennsylvania, there were company towns. The company owned every cottage in town. The company owned everything. They owned the store. They owned the doctor worked for the company. The clinic belonged to the company. All that kind of stuff. And these men and women lived in marvelous estates, beautiful homes, servants, and they were just money just rolling in dough. And the workers were struggling. And then at the holiday time, they'd have a big banquet, and they'd have turkeys for everybody, and gifts for the children, and that kind of thing. So with all of this economic disparity and all the problems attendant on it, but the only happiness these poor people had, these workers, this labor force, was booze and sex. Their families, that's it. And so unions were discriminated against. If workers attempted to unionize, they were beaten up. Police forces were called upon to beat them up. National Guard was brought out, beat them up, punish them, lock them up, shut them out of the factory, shut them out of the mines, all whatever. So unionism had a very bad name. And then came along Pope Leo XIII, and he wrote an encyclical called Rerum Novarum, R-E-R-U-M, Novarum, N-O-V-A-R-U-M. And he revolutionized Catholic and Christian thought. Said people have a right to the democratic process. He validated democracy. He validated unionization. Democracy, unionization, representative government, unions. He spoke of the family. Family, what do you call it, family values, the right to marry, the right to life is tied right in with the right to have a job. Because if you don't have a job, you don't have any money, you don't have any money, you don't have anything to eat. So he spoke about living family saving wage. Living family saving wage.
When did he come on?
Late 1900s.
No, 19.
Or late 1800s. Spoke about justice, equal access to justice. And all of this is based upon human dignity. For we are made in the image and likeness of God. He spoke out against racism and bias and prejudice. He wrote about developing the human potential of every human being, of every person. Human potential of every person. And he spoke out against exploitation of human beings. We are people, not cogs of industry. Social, these are what we would call Catholic social teachings. Catholic social teachings or Catholic social justice. Catholic social teachings, Catholic social justice. Now, there were some people very upset about this. And we lost Catholics because of this. They don't like these ideas. There are people today who don't like them either. Advocated democracy. Democracy. We got democracy this summer? Yeah, okay. Then the subsequent popes, like Pope Pius XI, he came up with something called Catechism 40 years later. And he amplified it. And every pope since then has added to it, expanded on this basic social teaching as we meet various problems in society. Now it's expanding into war, against war, you know? Making of peace, huh? That's part of the movement. Against nuclear war, working for disarmament, mediation, difficulties, that kind of stuff. Spoke out against communism and National Socialism. Communism and Nazism. Spoke out against nationalism.
This is still Leo?
Patriotism is one thing, nationalism is another. I mean, it's okay to be patriotic, but my country is the only country in the world that's worthwhile and the best, we don't have it. That's against contrary to Catholic social teaching. And no one nation can exploit another nation. Spoke out against secular values and materialism. Spoke out against genocide, ethnic cleansing. One of the great teachers of Catholic social teaching was Monsignor Higgins of Catholic University of America, Washington, D.C. And we all are aware that in this last 100 years, we have had the most violent experience in human history. Stalin alone was responsible for the deaths of 90 million people.
Who was?
Stalin, Joseph Stalin, 90 million people. And that, not taking into account Hitler's activities, Pol Pot, or Pot Pol, was it? Pol Pot, Mao Zedong, North Korea, North Vietnam, stuff going on in Laos. All the problems in Africa. Not taking it, it's also thousands and thousands and thousands of people affected by the revolutions and civil wars in South and Central America and in Africa. I mean, just violence, violence, violence. The beginning of all this violence was the French Revolution. And there's been violence ever since, somewhere or in many places at the same time. First World War, Second World War, Korean War, that's just wars, wars, wars. The church speaks out against these wars. First World War started out rather stupidly. A bunch of cousins vying with each other for power. The Kaiser was related to Queen Victoria. One-upsmanship. Just simply got out of hand.
Was the shooting of Archduke Ferdinand in 1914?
You know?
Was that the shot that apparently started on?
Emperor of Austria, Otto, yes, all that. So, more and more and more, we are not justifying war. There is the theory called the just war theory, but it's eroding into the realization that wars produce more wars. Wars don't ever fix the situation. It doesn't work. They don't work. Never have, and they never will. Okay, then there was the Cold War. And then with the end of colonialism, rebellion of suppressed people against former conquerors, colonizers, and some of that's still going on. The attitude. Some of the problems of the Islamic uprisings are rebellion against European powers who conquered these various lands and ran them for several hundred years. They're resenting that, and they identify these Western countries, these European countries, or the United States, and its Christianity with the exploitation. In every country, there's racism. One bunch of people thinking they're better than the others. Like one tribe thinking it's better than the other. One color thinking it's better than the other. One language usage thinking it's better than the other. That kind of stuff. And then it just simply gets out of hand. Like in Rwanda. One tribe thought it was better than the other tribe. And you fix that. That kind of stuff. So in the last last century, the popes have all called out against wars. And certainly not blessed the wars. Any questions? It's a real downer, isn't it?
Yeah. I just finished a book authored by a science writer for the New York Times, I don't remember his name, and it was called something about the dawn of men. And he was saying where a cultural anthropologist would say 50,000 years ago when we left Africa, that the groups were pretty much bound by clans, by who you're related to, and that only 150 or so would be the number. And he said we were much more violent then. And that's just what this guy, as again, he's a synthesizer.
But there weren't as many.
There weren't as many, but my tribe of 150, when we came into you, we tried to annihilate all of you. And anyway, he says the cultural anthropologists say that we're in a more peaceful time, it seems like, than we were when we went out of Africa.
Yeah.
I'm trying to bring the book in. Anyway, I thought that quite interesting. And they said that, well, we have a greater way to annihilate. But in those times, we were trying to get rid of every group that we encountered. Everyone, excepting maybe taking some of the women.
And see, those people lived on in the women who were raped or impregnated by the conquerors.
Right.
So that the genes lasted because of that activity.
And see, and I think as a biologist that we're all racist. And we try to overcome that. I mean, I think people go, I'm not racist, but I think you're right. My opinion is, I think you try not to be racist, at least we would hope that. But I think genetically, why did we get Italians, French, Spanish, and so forth? Because we were reproductively isolated, and we developed our own language and our own skin color and all these sorts of things, and we thought that, yeah, we were better, or that they were different. And I think that's a genetic thing that we have, and we have to try and overcome that. I mean, as a biologist, that's what I believe. I think everything.
Emphasis on the differences rather than looking for the similarities.
Yeah.
Okay. Any other comments?
Well, I don't think Pius XII had a very good record on being against war and so forth. He took him a heck of a long time before he spoke out against Hitler and Nazism.
In the camps.
There was those who said that he didn't.
Yeah.
Yeah,
But
but
others who said that he aided the Jews as best he could in Rome and in Italy and encouraged others to shelter them. But nothing was in writing, it was just all verbal.
He was in a very difficult situation where
Yeah.
he was at that time.
there's a lot of misunderstanding about that.
Napoleon captured one of the popes, I think it was Pius VI, Pius VII, like that, and he dragged him to France. And the guy was an old man, like he was 80s, very frail, skinny little sickly man. He dragged him behind a horse
Oh my God.
and treated him very cruelly because I'm the emperor. And then the next pope crowned him emperor at at Notre Dame. Well, he grabbed the crown from the pope's hand and put it on his own head. Because he won it fair and square. So he wasn't the pope making him the emperor of the earth, it was himself that had done this. You know, kind of a little ego problem. Or a big ego problem for another guy. So with all that history, and then Pius IX being booted out of his kingdom in central Italy, papacy wasn't in much of a position to be telling anybody anything. That makes sense? Fear.
Well, I don't know. I mean,
Fear is a terrible crippler. It is one of the real cripplers. We hear about polio being a crippler, and heart condition being a crippler. Well, fear is a terrible crippler too. A lot of people motivated by fear or attacked by fear will fail to act positively or aggressively or affirmatively at all. So I think that he was afraid too. We don't know enough. Those documents have not been opened up. And I hope that they will be soon, because we need to know. The world needs to know. It was people like Leo the 13th, Pius the 11th, who basically looked at the church, which was in the modern world, and so it has to act appropriately in response to the modern world. Well, thank you. I wondered where you went. Mad at something I said, I didn't know. You left her K behind, so So the church, in responding to the modern world, sometimes is unpopular. Because secular values and materialism are very important to some people. And shabby thinking is one of the problems of our society, maybe any society. The next time we're together, we're going to talk further about the age of reason and the age of enlightenment and all the advances in human behavioral sciences and psychology, sociology, psychiatry, medicine, education. And Peter's going to lead that discussion. Aren't you? Oh, come on. Give me a break. So, I've asked you to, if you want any of these papers, and we'd like to produce them between now and the next time we're together. So, if you would be kind enough to give them to here, I'll see what did you get to find that guy next class? Okay. Really? What? So any questions about anything?
I have a current events question. There's a lot of there's a lot of religious war and fighting going on in Africa right now. A lot of it between Christians
And Islamics.
and yes. Would that be Catholic Christians? Are they part of, and you spoke of 25 different disciplines of the
They're mostly Roman Catholics,
They are?
except
Okay.
in Ethiopia, Eritrea, and Egypt. You've got Coptic Christians there. Coptic Christians are among the oldest Christian expression, dating from St. Mark, the apostle, evangelist, and St. Philip the deacon. The history goes way back, and they're Semitic people. If you want to know what Jewish life was like in Jesus' time, go to a very small Ethiopian Eritrean village, and it's pretty much how things were. The way women are, the way motherhood is exhibited and lived, and many, I would say something like 25% of the Ethiopian and Eritrean Coptic Catholics or Christians have an office in the church. they have a ministry, a role that they're ordained for or officially appointed to function as. A very, very religious society. I would almost call it theocratic in one way. They have offices and missions and ministries that we never even heard of. But it's very, very much of a Christian and a Catholic society. And many of them have struggled for their survival against Islam from the 500s and 600s and 700s. And I would say that they're surviving, but they're certainly not thriving because of the constant threat. And the same goes for all of the, for Syria. St. Peter was the apostle to Syria. And they're besieged right now. Well, it's in terrible shape. Torn apart in the grip of civil war. And the ascendancy of Islam, what do they call it, rebirth of Islam in Egypt. It's creating a tremendous civil disturbance. The Islamic Brotherhood is not like the Knights of Columbus. It's, there is as one missionary put it to me about 50 years ago, he said, the soul of Africa is being fought over by the Islamics. They want the soul of Africa. I paid the way through the seminary with, I've told the story before, excuse me if I tell it again. Boy's name was Richard Diala, and I used to write magazine articles. I apparently thought I made a lot of money doing that, because he wrote me a letter asking to help pay his seminary expenses. Nigerian boy. Well, Nigeria's a rather crooked place. So I checked with his bishop to be sure he was for real, and yes, he really is a seminarian, and he really is studying for the priesthood. So I started to send him a monthly check to his family home. He had a single parent, his mother. I don't know whatever happened to the father, or if there was one. So this went on for a year, and he never got the checks. But they were never processed either, never cashed. So he wondered about it, and he asked me, I'm not getting any checks. So he eventually asked his mother, and he said, well, what's this priest's name? Father Thomas Devereux. Oh. So she went into a drawer and pulled out a whole wad of envelopes from Reverend Thomas Devereux, St. John the Baptist Church, 208 Matheson Street, Hillsborough, California. She said, I thought you wanted to be a Catholic priest, not a Baptist minister. That's why I didn't give you these letters. So we got that straightened out. He was ordained eventually. Richmond Diala is his name. And eventually he was named a pastor in Nigeria. And he was having a festival, his parish, like we have the, what do we call it, the annual
Parish Festival.
Parish Festival here, yeah. A big parish and a festival. And the Muslims came down and they raided this festival. They beat up all kinds of people and killed people and crippled people and everything. They crippled him, the priest, in order to force them into Islam. And that's what they say. You become Islamic or you're dead. Because they're so exclusive, so intolerant of all other religious expressions. All the Stan countries, Afghanistan, Pakistan, Kazakhstan, Pakistan, all the Stan countries that are bordered on either side, India over here and Arabia on this side, they were all fervent Buddhist countries, practicing Buddhism. And every young man is a Buddhist monk for some period of time in his life, formed in the Buddhist traditions. Buddhism is not so much a religion as it is a way of life, a way of becoming a better person. It's forms of prayer and meditation, practices that will bring be adherent to an experience of the divine, without knowing that the divine is a person or persons. But the Buddhists are a very holy people when they're really doing it right. That didn't matter to Islam. They wiped them out without even examining Buddhism, because they thought they were worshiping idols. Those idols, those statues that the Buddhists have, are not worshipped at all. They are representative of a virtue to be lived, like charity, compassion, mercy, understanding, knowledge, wisdom, whatever. A reminder to be loving, to be forgiving, to be charitable, as the Buddha was. But nobody worships them. In a real Buddha, they don't worship that stuff, those things. They're just reminders of living this way of life. But the Islamics didn't understand that. Just wiped out the guys and raped the women and enslaved the boys and turned them all into Muslims.